You are listening to the Hostage to the Devil podcast. Some listeners may find this content disturbing.
I know from day one you've been very sort of skeptical as to what you can provide to the project. But for me, as I said before, it's been so important to meet people who, in some way or form, actually had a conversation with Father Martin and Malachi Martin, because if you go on the internet forums, which I don't tend to do when I'm doing research, you tend to find that a lot of people have very strong opinions about the man.
I don't think that you could listen to Malachi. I never met the man in person, but I interviewed him for countless hours on the radio. I was very fortunate, and we became close friends, and I don't think you could listen to Malachi and not have a strong opinion one way or the other. I would classify myself as an agnostic, but Malachi affected me deeply, very, very deeply, with much of what he said. And a lot of things he said very much stick in my mind. One of those would be that in the streets of New York City, an area he frequented, he thought that the number of possessed, and I mean possessed by the devil, by Satan, were increasing by about 800% a year. That's frightening. He further suggested that as he walked down the street in New York, he could look into the eyes of many of the people that he would pass and know that they were one of the, what he called, perfectly possessed. And that's pretty frightening. So there are many things like that he said to me that will never leave my mind and will probably worry me to the grave. He speculated that these were people that had made deals with the devil, if you will, and are now financially reaping the benefits of what eventually will scorch their soul. He was a fascinating man. He also said a lot of things to me in private. We did talk a great deal. My wife at the time, now passed, was Catholic. And he was aware of the contents, the full contents of the Third Secret of Fatima. And he shared some of those that I cannot share with you or anybody because I promised. What he did say, if you want something chilling, is that try and imagine the very worst thing that you can imagine. We live now in the days of ISIS and terrorism and people getting burned alive, and so one can imagine some pretty bad stuff. He said, imagine the very worst you can imagine, and then I will tell you that it's going to be much worse than that. And he did it with an Irish accent that added the stamp of authenticity to somebody who's been a consultant to two popes. So there you have my immediate thoughts on Father Malachi Martin. I guess I would add to that I was told one day, tragically, that he fell down the steps.
Yeah.
And I do wonder about that.
If we could go back to the start, and so the audiences who are going to watch this film, hopefully in 6 months' time, you are aware of the Coast to Coast show, work which Malachi Martin frequented many times. Could you maybe talk about the birth of Coast to Coast, of your show, and the sort of target audiences that you were reaching?
Sure. My show began in a pretty interesting way. I was doing it at KWN, a radio station in Las Vegas. And it was a political show. And I very much, as you can see from the background, if you've got a wide-angle camera, I love radio, every form of radio, whether it's a hobby or it's my profession. And I got lured into doing a talk show, which I had done previously at KWN. And that then turned into the later night show, and I was very well aware that at night it covered 13 states, so I would be heard more widely. And I took the show to the nighttime, and I did it for a few months, and then I got bored. Politics, frankly, is sometimes interesting, most times boring. And so I began interviewing people like John Lear, the son of the man who brought us the Learjet, about UFOs and about other things that go bump in the night. And the resulting interest in the audience was so large, so overwhelming, that although the owners of the radio station at the point were very conservative and wanted conservative talk radio, they could not ignore the numbers. I got so many calls that they couldn't pay the 800-line bill. And it went from there. I did the show in that way for 2 or 3 years, and then it became syndicated, and then it grew like a cancer to about 550 radio stations across the U.S. and Canada. So that's how it happened. It was sort of, I don't want to say an accident, but it was an act of rebellion on my part that worked. I suppose in life that's sometimes how things happen.
Can you talk about how Malachi Martin came on your radar?
Sure. One of the great mysteries in life, if not the greatest mystery in life, is what happens after it's over. And there are many approaches that I took to examining that question. For example, people who would be hypnotized and would suddenly fall into a prior life. Evidence of ghosts. But in that mix, at some point, falls Malachi Martin, because Father Martin, because that's one of the great possibilities, is it not, believed by so many in the world now. So sure, Malachi Martin was a natural in terms of life after death. And he had some very strict views on the subject. And I learned that there are a great number of Catholics in the world right now who, when they hear a voice like that, know that they're getting instructed very strictly.
Could you maybe talk about, if you could remember, that initial phone conversation where you were asking Father Martin to come on the show, or even what were your first impressions of him when you first spoke to him on the telephone?
My first impressions were on the telephone, and I'm sure that this motion picture is going to have examples of Father Malachi Martin speaking. It's not possible to hear the man speak and not realize that you're in the presence of somebody great, somebody who has been advisor to 2 popes and is familiar with the Vatican. And by the way, his view of the Vatican also was extremely controversial. He believed that the influence of Satan was well entrenched in the Vatican, and that's about as controversial as one can get, I would think. And perhaps events since his passing, to some, would bear that out.
Is there a memorable moment? There's hours and hours of awesome archive between yourself and Malachi Martin. Is there anything that really just it was Malachi Martin, or which you found incredible moments on that radio show that really stands out from your time talking to Malachi Martin?
No, it was full of. If you're looking for a moment, I can't think of one. Again, I can think of the quotes that I've already mentioned, but everything about Malachi Martin was credible. And everything he did off the program was credible. In other words, a lot of the people that called later would speak to Malachi Martin privately, and he would help them. So everything about Malachi Martin was credible, on or off the air. And that was immediately apparent in a pre-interview. We do pre-interviews with guests, and so obviously the credibility hits you right in the face.
he would often provide his postal address live on your show, and he'd be like, for anybody who needed help, please contact me on this certain address.
That's right.
I mean, you can imagine the mail that he received afterwards, from people who thought they were possessed, or people who just needed some sort of maybe spiritual direction or some sort of comfort. Do you think Malachi Martin was right in doing so, and the reasons for doing that was because that's what he was like? He just liked to help people?
He gave out his personal information because he wanted to help people. Do I think it was a good idea? No. And I warned him very carefully that this might not be such a good idea. And I did that because of the thousands of emails that I received daily. So I knew what he was in for. And he continued to do it. So even after reaping the results of giving that information out, he continued to do it and help people.
The shows on exorcism and demonic possession and Antichrist, etc., they were extremely popular, and then obviously every Halloween they're getting repeated to this day. What was about those particular shows, those 4-hour shows on the devil and exorcism? What was it that was so good about that as a program?
Well, exorcism is scary. It's frightening. Because if exorcism is real, if somebody is really possessed, then all the rest of it's real, right? Heaven, hell, all the rest of it. So exorcism is scary. Now, you might like to know that since Malachi Martin, Father Martin, we have diligently searched for somebody who would be his equivalent, and with no luck. No luck. He was a real McCoy. He did real exorcisms. And like everything else I did on the air, you were free to believe or disbelieve what you heard. But I think the man came with a stamp of the real McCoy, and so it scared people.
I mean, just to go on that point that you made there about there has been, and there is at the moment, nobody like Malachi Martin since he passed away.
That's right.
What is it about his personality traits and his character traits that made him who he was and cannot be replaced?
I don't know. What is it that made Malachi what he was? Everything. His very deep belief, his Irish accents, his very basic fundamental faith. And I'm not sure that you find that in many of today's priests. So this is very difficult to put into words, but virtually everything about him, even without his physical presence, his voice, his manner, his knowledge, every bit of it fell on you as he's the real thing. If you want to listen, if you want to believe, do so. If not, it's at your peril.
So some of your programs touched on, the ultimate antagonist in the world, which is the devil, and then there's the protagonist, which is God. Has your own faith sort of been strengthened by the likes of the conversations with Father Martin, or have you always been a believer, or has your belief strengthened since doing the show?
At the time, I was married to a Catholic. That was while I was interviewing Father Martin. I'm married to a Catholic now. I really am hesitant to get into my own belief systems, frankly. I'm not sure. I have questions. I think that's the way I would put it. I have questions.
I know some of this has been repeated, but can you provide your own view about exorcism and demonic possession? Are you a skeptic? Are you unsure? Are you on the fence? Are you a true believer that it is real? What are your own personal views about the subject of exorcism?
Well, I don't know, and I asked Father Martin about that many times, and he was sure. Now, I think we can all understand that there are people who have mental problems that mimic demonic possession. whether all of them are mental problems or, as Father Martin believed, a certain percentage, albeit small, are the real thing, that is the question, and it's one of my questions.
So with regards to the media and Hollywood, you tend to, sensationalize the topic. When I spoke to exorcists in Rome, for example, Catholic priest exorcists in Rome, they never denied the fact that these certain manifestations could happen, but Hollywood likes to condense all these manifestations into a film because they're selling a product. Has there anything that's happened on the show, or any callers that are called in, or cap time, or anything that Father Martin, is there anything that which really gave you goosebumps?
Oh, all the time. Did I get goosebumps? Of course I did, all the time. Not just from Father Martin, but from other callers to the show. I can recall a young lady I interviewed who was committing herself and her child to the devil. And she was very serious about it, extremely serious. So did I get goosebumps? All the time. I had goosebumps all the time doing the show. Probably not quite as frequently as those who listened, because I did it every night. But oh yes, goosebumps. Lots of those.
To give a general picture then about the future of the world, the way the world is going, you've got a lot of dwindling faiths, you've got a lot of interest in the occult still, experimental religions. What is your ultimate fear about the future and going forward?
If you were to ask me at this moment my ultimate fear, it's probably the growing Muslim fundamentalist movement demonstrated by ISIS right now, spreading across the Middle East. And if you want to look at a parallel in time, you might look at 1933, somewhere in that era, where the fascist movement in Germany was getting going. And I think it's what we see now in the Middle East is very much like that. And if we treat it the same way, it'll end up with the same result. And I think that there are those now beginning to realize that what they want is Armageddon. And of course, the Bible tells us eventually we'll get there.
Had you ever read Hostage to the Devil as Monarchy's book and been researched? Had you ever read it, and what were your thoughts about the book, if you had?
I guess, yes, I did read it. Having interviewed Malachi Martin for so many hours, I guess my reflections come more from that than they do from his book. I don't know how to put it otherwise.
And in the later shows, particularly the 97 show, you discussed Father Martin's health at the time, and you questioned how old he was, and
yes,
why are you still doing what you're doing now?
Yes,
because you always famously quoted that every single exorcism takes that little bit out of you from soul point of view and also physical point of view. So, what was your reaction to his death? I mean, in 1999, what was your reaction to his death?
Well, I think I already mentioned it. My reaction to his death was, really? Fell down the steps? I imagined many exits for Father Martin. Down the steps was never one of them. Do I think? Well, I'm not in a position to make a definitive statement on what I think without getting in trouble, so I'm not going to.
Monarchy believed Old Scratch had come back to see him off. In a sense, he told his sister Delaney in the hospital ward that before he lapsed into a coma, that an unseen force had pushed him down the stairs. I mean, even up to his death, he just exuberated sort of this romanticism and this adventure and this excitement.
Those of us who are passionate about what we do don't stop doing it. I'm about to get into another radio venture. Look behind me. This is, it's going to be my life until I fall down my steps.
Okay, this is quite a difficult question, and I've got some great stuff already. Could you, and you might laugh at this question, but could you summarize Malachi Martin? It's everything for a conclusion. Could you summarize Malachi Martin as a person?
the real thing. To summarize Malachi Martin is only to say the real thing. He was the real thing. We've been looking for somebody who even approximates the real thing since, and he's not there. That's why I'm sure the cameras are pointed at me now.
Is there anything else you'd like to disclose before we wrap? Anything else you want to say about Malachi? Sort of a farewell or anything? All right. Thanks for listening, and remember, we have a Facebook page too, so please give us a like and buy us a coffee over at buymeacoffee.com to help us keep this podcast going. And it would only be right to finish with the main man himself.
We're in a time when it would be possible, if God allowed it, for Lucifer to take over the church and run it into the ground. It's the availing time, and all we can do is do our best and hope.
Just hang on for the bumpy ride.
Keep our eyes on the skies, the great man. We don't know much. We know the signs of danger, and we know what we shouldn't do. We can't look around the corner. By the way, I'm 77, and I'm glad I never knew what was going to happen to me, because I would have said, no, let me off this boat. I said, long ago. It's good not to know the future to that extent, and we all believe we have an angel, a guardian angel.
Right.
Actually, by the way, we have two angels, but let me not complicate it now. We have one angel called the guardian angel. And in a normal way, if I am observing the law, if I'm keeping myself relatively clean of sin and trying to serve God in my own way, my angel communicates with me in the accepted mode. And the accepted mode is by inspirations, by instincts, by twinges of conscience, by memories. Now, if that angel is not there, he has been renounced, and Lucifer is in his place. He does the very same. He uses the very same mode. That's called possession. Mm-hmm. Angelic possession is just as powerful as demonic possession. Mm-hmm. But many people do not attain to angelic possession because it takes a great amount of fidelity to your angel and to your instincts and to your life. But it is the source of great purity and great energy and great joy and great confidence in life. It doesn't mean you're not going to be spared suffering. No. Life is suffering anyway. I must tell you a story which may shock you, but a young man whom I knew very well, he lived in New York for a while, and he was a young man, my God, he had the usual libido and he was very honest, good, very educated, and a good American. But he got to know a girl, and they slept together. And at a certain moment, she said to him, we must drink each other's blood. Just a little nick in the arm, and you drink my blood, and I'll drink your blood. And that will cement a pact with the master between us. And at that moment, this boy who had been baptized, his angel must have spoken to him silently. He got out of the bed immediately and fled. Once you're taken, you're taken. And you have no idea of the tyranny, Michael, the painful, helpless tyranny that grips a man. A strong man will cry, describing their impotency to escape, their helplessness, and the tyranny they're subjected to. And mind control is not the way to put it. It's oppression. It's the most extraordinary, and it's the most extraordinary thing. And the pain they have, the helpless pain they have, they can do anything but escape it. And their minds, their conscious lives, their sleep, their waking, their love-making, their money-making, their everything is all darkened over by this horrible shadow. And they can't do anything about it. It's the helplessness, the pain. They cry.
Wow.
They weep, tears, and they can't do anything. They're caught. It's a terrible slavery.